The wind whipped across the dry plains, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the faint smoke of distant fires. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the scattered homesteads that dotted the rugged hills. In the distance, a lone figure stood at the edge of a wooden fence, eyes fixed on the horizon where the jagged mountains met the sky. Her name was Lenora Blackwell, and the weight of her solitude pressed down on her like the unrelenting afternoon heat. Widowed for more than a year, she had inherited her husband's lands, but the property brought her little comfort. Nights were long and silent, filled with memories she could not chase away, and the ache of loneliness that clung to her like a second skin. Across the dusty trail, a group of riders moved with purpose, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dirt that glinted gold in the fading sunlight. At their head rode an Apache warrior, tall and imposing, with eyes dark as the night and sharp with intelligence. His name was Tokuda, meaning friend to all, though those who truly knew him understood that trust was not easily earned. He carried the weight of his people's history and the pain of countless battles fought to protect what little remained of their lands. Despite the danger etched into his face, there was a calm strength in him, a silent authority that made others stop and watch when he passed. Lenora's gaze followed Tokuda's approach with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Rumors of his skills in both the fight and the hunt had reached even her isolated homestead. Some whispered that he was fearless, others said he could read the thoughts of men like an open book, yet it was not fear that stirred in her chest. It was a desperate kind of hope, one born from too many nights spent listening to the empty wind and too many days watching the crops struggle in the unforgiving sun. She had watched the seasons change, and still she had no heir to carry her husband's name, no one to inherit the life he had built. When Tokuda dismounted, his presence seemed to command the earth itself. The leather of his boots creaked softly against the wooden porch, and his eyes met Lenora's with an intensity that made her heart skip. "I hear you have questions for me," he said, voice low but steady, carrying the rhythm of the plains in every word. There was no pretense in his tone, no hint of amusement. It was as though the land itself had delivered him to her doorstep, and he had no choice but to listen. Lenora swallowed hard. Her lips trembled slightly, though she fought to keep her voice steady. "I do," she admitted. "I have a proposition for you, though it may seem strange, even desperate." She paused, searching his face for any flicker of judgment. She found none. Only curiosity, sharp and calculating. "I will give you my lands," she said finally, "all that my late husband and I have built." But in return, her words faltered, and she looked down at the wooden floor beneath her boots. "I ask for a child." The silence that followed was heavy, as if the wind itself had stopped to listen. Tokuda's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in thought. The proposition was not one he had ever expected, not in the stories he had heard of white settlers and their desperate measures. Yet in her gaze, he saw something more than loneliness or grief, determination, a fierce courage that had survived loss and hardship. It intrigued him, even unsettled him, because the world was seldom so honest, so raw in its demands. "Your land is vast," he said finally, voice careful, measured, "and your offer is dangerous. You know this." His hand brushed the hilt of the knife at his waist, not in threat, but as if weighing the gravity of the choice she had placed before him. "But I also see what drives you. There is fire in your heart, Lenora Blackwell. Fire will not be easily quenched, no matter what fate is taken from you." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with unflinching resolve. "I know the risks," she said. "I know what people will whisper if they learn of this. But I cannot bear for my husband's legacy to fade into dust. I cannot leave this land without hope for what comes next. You are strong, you are wise, and you are the one who can ensure both our futures." Tokuda studied her in silence, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. He had wandered these plains, seeing the same desperation in the eyes of settlers and warriors alike. He had seen families torn apart by hunger, by greed, by the unforgiving hand of fate. And yet he had never seen a plea so direct, so unflinching, so entwined with both hope and courage. It was rare, this kind of raw honesty, stirred something within him that he could not easily name. The sky above darkened, turning a bruised shade of purple as the sun slipped behind the mountains. Shadows stretched across the land, elongating the trees and the fences, and Lenora felt the tension between them deepen. The offer hung in the air like the heavy scent of rain before a storm, impossible to ignore. She could see the calculations in Tokuda's mind, the unspoken questions forming behind his eyes. Could trust be given so freely? Could a warrior of the Apache really bind himself to a stranger by such a promise? "You speak of a child," he said finally, his voice a whisper of wind through dry leaves. "Do you understand what that will mean? What that path may demand from both of us?" There was no accusation, only inquiry, K-test. He needed to know if her heart was as steadfast as her words, if her desperation could withstand the weight of what she had asked. "I understand," she replied, without hesitation. "More than you can imagine. I've watched life fade around me, and I have learned that waiting for fortune or fate will get me nowhere. I am ready to bear the consequences, whatever they may be. I will not let fear dictate my choices." Her voice gained strength with each word, echoing against the mountains, carried by the wind that had witnessed generations rise and fall upon these plains. For a long moment, neither spoke. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. Dakota could feel the pulse of history beneath his boots, the stories of countless families who had lived and died upon this earth. And he realized that Lenora's plea was not born of selfishness. It was born of a profound understanding of life's fragility, of the fleeting moments that demanded courage and action. Yet the decision was not his alone to make. He was a warrior, yes, but also a guardian of his people. Every choice he made rippled beyond himself, touching lives he could not fully predict. Still, the thought of turning away from this strange, determined woman stirred an unfamiliar ache, a curiosity that clawed at the edges of his resolve. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke from a distant campfire, and the faint cry of a hawk circling overhead. Lenora took a cautious step closer, her hand brushing the railing of the porch. Her eyes held his, searching for a glimmer of agreement, of understanding, of some unspoken acknowledgement that he might consider her plea. Dakota did not respond immediately. He took in her stance, her expression, the raw honesty that seemed to radiate from her very being. He considered the vastness of her lands, the solitude of her life, and the audacity of the request she had made. And deep down, he sensed that whatever choice he made now would alter the course of both their lives forever. But before any answer could pass his lips, a distant sound cut through the stillness, a gunshot, sharp and sudden, echoing from the hills behind her property. Both Lenora and Dakota stiffened, eyes widening as their instincts kicked in. The plains were no stranger to danger, but the timing was uncanny. Whoever had fired the shot had been watching, waiting, and the threat was now very real. Lenora's heart pounded in her chest, and she glanced at Dakota, seeking not just protection, but guidance. He moved with fluid precision, scanning the horizon, calculating the distance, and the likelihood of pursuit. The unspoken tension between them shifted, morphing from curiosity and desperation into something sharper urgency. "I think we are not alone," Dakota murmured, voice barely audible over the wind. His hand rested lightly on his knife, ready for what was coming. Lenora gripped the railing, knuckles white, her mind racing with questions she could not yet answer. Why'd fired the shot? Why now? And more importantly, what would this mean for the impossible choice she had just placed before the Apache warrior standing in her doorway? The sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, leaving the world cloaked in shadow and the first hints of stars beginning to prick the sky. In that dimming light, two figures faced each other, one a widow desperate to save her legacy, the other a warrior torn between duty, instinct, and the strange unspoken bond forming between them. Neither knew what the night would bring, and both were aware that the path ahead would be fraught with danger, mystery, and choices that could not be undone. And so, with the plains holding its breath around them, Lenora Blackwell and Dakota, the Apache warrior, stood at the edge of destiny, their fates intertwined by an offer that defied tradition, challenged morality, and demanded courage beyond measure. The wind carried a warning, the shadows whispered secrets. And somewhere in the distance, the echo of that gunshot reminded them both that time was already running out. The night had swallowed the plains, leaving only the pale glow of the moon to cast long, trembling shadows across Lenora's homestead. The echo of the gunshot still lingered in the air, sharp and threatening, as if the hills themselves were warning of trouble. Lenora's breath came in shallow bursts, her hand pressed against her chest, while Dakota crouched low beside the porch, eyes scanning the darkness for movement. The wind carried a chill now, seeping into her bones, reminding her that survival out here had little to do with courage and everything to do with being alert. "Who could be out there?" Lenora whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound steady. "There's no one for miles." Tokuda's gaze did not leave the tree line. "Not everyone comes alone," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Some travel in shadows, waiting for the right moment. Someone knows you have something. Someone wants it." His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his knife, the leather worn and familiar under his fingers. "And that someone doesn't care if you're a widow or if your lands carry history. They see opportunity." Lenora felt a shiver run down her spine. She had always believed that the lands she inherited from her husband were safe, simply because they were remote, overlooked by the world's greed, but the thought that someone might have been watching her, calculating a way to take what she held dear, made the isolation suddenly feel like a trap. "What do we do?" Takuda's eyes met hers, steady and unwavering, and she found a strange reassurance in them. "We prepare," he said. "We make sure that whoever comes knows this place is not defenseless." He moved with deliberate precision, checking the doors and windows of the homestead, securing what could be secured. Every movement seemed practiced, every decision measured. Lenora watched him and realized that this man, who had appeared as if summoned by fate itself, carried not just strength, but the wisdom of someone who had survived countless dangers. Once the house was fortified as best as they could, Takuda gestured for Lenora to sit beside the hearth. He started a small fire, its light flickering across their faces, casting them in hues of gold and shadow. "You live here alone?" He asked the question more of an observation than curiosity. "Yes," she admitted. "Since my husband passed, it's been just me and the land. I manage the crops, tend the animals, keep the fences repaired. Some nights I wonder if the isolation is worse than the loneliness." She looked down at her hands, roughened by work and age. "The land is all I have left, but it feels fragile, like it could slip away at any moment." Takuda nodded, understanding more than she realized. "Land carries memory," he said. "Every hill, every creek, every stone holds the stories of those who came before. And when it is lost, the stories are lost too. That is why your fear is not foolish. It is rooted in something real." Lenora's eyes met his, and for the first time she felt as if someone truly understood the weight she carried. She wanted to tell him everything, her grief, her hopes, the daring proposition she had made, but the threat outside reminded her that there were still things she could not reveal. Some truths, she knew, had to be guarded carefully until trust had been earned. Hours passed, the fire crackling and sending sparks into the darkened room. Outside, the plains whispered secrets through the tall grass, and the hoot of an owl cut through the night. Alara found herself drawn to Tokuda's stories of the plains and the people he protected. He spoke of his tribe's struggles to preserve their lands, of the treaties that were broken, the promises ignored. Each tale painted a picture of a man shaped by loss, responsibility, and the quiet power of endurance. "I've seen the land taken," he said, voice low and measured, "and I've seen families torn apart by greed and violence. That is why I cannot simply ignore someone trying to claim what you hold. If they mean harm, they will learn quickly that this land is defended not just by the fences or the walls, but by those who care for it." Lenora shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of his words. His presence brought her a strange mixture of comfort and unease. She was drawn to him, yet wary of the power he carried. And beneath it all, the tension of her earlier requests, the offer of her lands in exchange for a child, remained unspoken between them, hovering like a shadow over the firelight. Outside, the night seemed to grow darker, almost alive. The rustle of wind through the trees sounded different now, sharper, as though carrying whispers meant for ears attuned to danger. Tokuda's hand rested on the table near the door, alert even in the quiet moments. "We may not see them yet," he said, "but they are out there, and they are watching." Lenora nodded, gripping the edge of the table. She realized that her life, once predictable and defined by routine, had shifted in an instant. The presence of this warrior, the sound of the gunshot, and the weight of her own desires had set her on a path that she could not turn back from. Every heartbeat reminded her that choices had consequences, and some consequences could not be undone. Takuda stood and moved toward the window, peering into the darkness. His expression was unreadable, the firelight catching only the sharp lines of his jaw and the intensity of his eyes. "The plains are full of secrets," he said finally. "Some are old, carried by the wind for generations. Others are new, whispered by men who do not care what they destroy in the pursuit of gain. We must be ready for both." Lenora followed him, standing beside him, feeling the cool glass against her palm. She wanted to ask him about the child, about what it would mean, about how such a thing could ever come to pass between them. But the tension outside, the unseen danger that stalked the land, made those thoughts feel fragile and foolish. For now, survival came first. Understanding and desire could wait. A sudden noise snapped them both to attention, a branch snapping underfoot, perhaps a horse moving through the darkness. Their eyes locked, unspoken communication passing between them. Dakota moved toward the door, body coiled like a predator, ready for whatever threat might emerge from the night. Lenora felt her pulse quicken, and for the first time in months, the fear she had buried deep within her came roaring to the surface. Yet even in that fear, she felt a strange surge of determination. The land was hers, and she would not let it be taken without a fight. The legacy of her husband, the promise of the future, and the spark of hope she clung to would not be extinguished. Not tonight. Not while she still drew breath. The wind shifted again, carrying a new sound, a low, distant howl, perhaps of a wolf, or perhaps of some human presence moving unseen. Lenora's eyes widened, and Dakota's hand tightened around his knife. They both knew that the night had only just begun, and that the coming hours would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. Dakota spoke quietly, almost to himself, yet with enough weight for Lenora to hear. "The plains do not forgive weakness, and those who tread upon them unprepared may find that the land itself turns against them." His gaze swept over the rolling hills, dark against the moonlight. "We must decide soon what we are willing to risk." Lenora swallowed hard, feeling the tension coil around her like a live wire. She wanted to speak, to urge him to stay, to guide her through this darkness. But words felt small against the enormity of what awaited them. And deep within her, the memory of her own plethora offer she had made, daring and dangerous, stirred a new kind of fear. Would Dakota accept? Would he understand? Or would her desperation end in ruin? Outside, the shadows deepened, and the moon climbed higher, illuminating only fragments of the land. Every rustle, every whisper of wind, every distant howl reminded them that the plains were alive, watching, waiting. The world beyond the homestead seemed vast and merciless, a place where fortune and danger danced together, and where every choice carried consequences far greater than any one person could imagine. Lenora's hand brushed against Dakota's arm, seeking reassurance, seeking connection. He did not flinch, did not pull away, and for a moment the two of them stood together against the unknown. But even as their hearts beat in cautious rhythm, the night pressed closer, heavy with secrets, danger, and unspoken truths. Somewhere in the darkness, movement stirred. A shadow slipped between the trees, silent, deliberate. Dakota's eyes narrowed, catching the hint of it in the moonlight. He reached for the door, preparing to step out, while Lenora held her breath, bracing herself for what was coming. And in that frozen moment, the plain seemed to hold its breath as well, waiting to see which way fate would turn. Who would stand, who would falter, and how far they were willing to go to protect the fragile promise of life, land, and legacy. The shadow that had slipped through the trees did not make itself known immediately. Lenora's heart pounded as Dakota pressed his back to the doorframe, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the porch. Every sound of the night seemed amplified, the rustle of grass, the low whistle of wind through the broken fence, the distant cry of a coyote. He could sense movement, subtle and calculated, like someone or something was testing the boundaries of her property before making a decisive step. Lenora tried to steady her breathing, gripping the edge of the wooden railing. Fear twisted her stomach, but beneath it was a determination she had never known before. This land was hers, the last connection to her husband, and she would not let it be claimed by strangers or thieves. Yet the thought of what she had asked of Dakota, the promise of her lands in exchange for something so personal, remained unspoken in the night's cold silence. It hovered between them, unacknowledged but impossible to ignore. Dakota moved silently, his movements fluid and precise. He had spent years reading the land, interpreting the faintest of signs of broken branch, an unusual footstep, the subtle shift of shadows in the moonlight. Whoever had entered the outskirts of her property was skilled, deliberate, and perhaps desperate. His hand rested on the hilt of his knife ready, but he also knew that not every danger could be met with violence. Sometimes patience and observation revealed more than a blade ever could. Lenora followed his gaze, trying to catch any hint of what he saw. The night seemed alive, every shadow holding potential threat. "Who would want this land?" she whispered, almost to herself. "It's remote. It's barely worth the trouble." Dakota's jaw tightened. Remote doesn't mean unimportant. Land carries stories, history, and sometimes secrets. People will risk a lot for what they think belongs to them. Some are willing to destroy anyone who stands in their way. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and unwavering. "You must understand, Lenora, the kind of trouble you've invited by daring to make your request. By offering your lands in exchange for what only fate can grant." Her throat tightened, but she refused to retreat. "I understand the risk," she said firmly. "I know it may bring danger. I also know that if I do nothing, the legacy my husband left behind will vanish with me. I cannot accept that fate." Her voice was low but steady, and in it Tokota heard the echo of courage he respected. Suddenly, the wind carried a new sound, a faint, rhythmic crunching, deliberate footsteps across dry grass. Dakota's body tensed. "They are closer," he muttered. "We have no time for hesitation." He gestured for Lenora to step behind him as he moved to the edge of the porch, every sense alert. The first shadow emerged from the darkness, a man, gaunt and wiry, face partially hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. He froze when he noticed Tokata, hand resting near his holster. Tokata did not speak, letting the tension stretch thin like a wire. The man's eyes darted to the homestead, to Lenora, and then back to Tokata. Something in his stance betrayed both caution and purpose. "Evening," the stranger said finally, voice steady, but there was a hardness to it, like iron scraped across stone. "Heard there was land up for grabs." Lenora's pulse jumped. Tokata's knife shifted slightly in his hand, but he remained calm, almost predator-like. "Land belongs to those who tend it," Tokata replied, voice low, measured. "And it isn't given lightly." The stranger's lips tightened. "I don't ask lightly either," he said, voice carrying an edge. "There's opportunity here, and I intend to see it claimed. Won't take no for an answer." Dakota's eyes narrowed, and for a heartbeat the air seemed to crackle with unspoken threat. Lenora felt a chill run through her. This was no random traveler. He had come with purpose, and there would be consequences if they misstepped. "Leave," Dakota said finally, calm but firm, "and you may walk away unharmed." The man's hand twitched toward his holster, but before he could act, a second figure appeared, a woman, tall and wiry, her eyes sharp and calculating. Her voice carried over the night air, cold and deliberate. "You think you can scare us off?" she said. "The land is worth more than your rules, Apache. Step aside and no one gets hurt." Lenora's stomach dropped. She had feared a single intruder, not a pair of determined strangers. The balance of power shifted suddenly, and she realized how vulnerable she truly was. Yet beneath her fear, a spark of resolve flared. If Dakota was willing to protect her and her lands, then she would stand with him, not cower behind him. Tokata studied the pair, analyzing every twitch, every shift in posture. His mind raced through strategies: how to protect Lenora, how to safeguard the homestead, and how to confront the intruders without unnecessary bloodshed. The stakes were higher than just land. They were stepping into a game of wills and survival, and one misstep could cost them everything. "Why do you want this land?" Lenora demanded suddenly, stepping forward despite Dakota's subtle motion to stay back. Her voice rang clear in the tense night. "Who sent you? What could be worth risking lives over a homestead no one would otherwise notice?" The woman's eyes flicked to Lenora, sharp and cold. "That's not your concern," she said, voice hard. "Step aside and we'll deal with things quietly. Resist, and, well, you'll see consequences you're not prepared for." Lenora felt her stomach twist with unease. These strangers were relentless, and Dakota's calm exterior did little to ease her nerves. Yet she saw the quiet confidence in his eyes, the way his body coiled with readiness, and she knew that he was prepared to protect her. Even if it meant confronting danger head-on. Tokata's voice cut through the tension. "If you want what is mine by law and labor, you will have to face the consequences," he said. The land belongs to those who live and fight for it. No one else decides. The strangers exchanged a glance, hesitation flickering across their faces. They were skilled, that much was clear, but so was Tokuda. Neither side moved, the night thick with tension, and for a moment the world seemed suspended. Every breath, every heartbeat amplified. Lenora could feel the weight of history pressing on them, the unbroken struggles for survival on these plains, the legacy of every life lost and every family torn apart. And she realized, with sudden clarity, that her request, the one that had brought Tokuda here, had placed her directly in the middle of forces she could not fully control. Beyond the immediate threat, questions swirled in her mind. Who were these strangers really? Were they sent by someone with a claim to her husband's legacy? Or were they simply opportunists drawn by rumors of her isolated homestead? And even more pressing, what would Tokuda's decision mean for her plea? The offer she had made so boldly? Tokuda's gaze shifted back to her briefly, and she felt the unspoken message. Trust him. Stand with him. This is bigger than fear, bigger than doubt. The wind stirred again, carrying distant sounds, perhaps other intruders, perhaps nothing at all. But the tension only deepened, and Lenora realized that the night would not end quietly. Every shadow now carried possibility. Every whisper of movement, a reminder that the conflict she had invited into her life was far from over. And even as the strangers hesitated, weighing their next move, Lenora felt a new awareness settle in. The land she had inherited was not just property, was a symbol of resilience, a testament to life endured against hardship. Protecting it would demand courage beyond anything she had yet imagined. And the choice she had made in asking Tokuda for help had entwined their fates in ways neither could yet predict. The strangers finally made a small move, shifting closer, testing Tokuda's response. Lenora felt the tension coil tighter, the night alive with possibility, danger, and the unspoken threads of destiny drawing them all forward. Somewhere, beyond the hills, the plains seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would unfold. And in the stillness, with the moon casting fractured light across the land, Lenora understood that the night had only just begun, and that the challenges to come would test her courage, her choices, and her very survival. The night stretched on, heavy with tension and the scent of damp earth. Lenora's hands trembled as she moved behind Tokuda, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a warning. The strangers had not advanced yet, but their presence lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Tokuda's eyes never wavered, scanning the darkness, listening to the night with a precision honed over years of survival. He had seen danger take many forms, but this was different, calculated, patient, and persistent. Stay close, he whispered, barely audible, as he guided Lenora toward the back of the homestead. They are testing us. They want to see if fear will break your resolve. Lenora's heart pounded. She could not remember a night like this, when every instinct screamed caution, and yet the fire of determination inside her refused to dim. She thought of the land, her husband's legacy, and the future she had dared to dream with Tokuda. Every step she took behind him was a step toward both danger and possibility. The strangers made another move, faint at first, shadows slipping between the fence posts, the glint of metal catching the moonlight. Tokuda's body tensed, coiled like a spring, ready to strike. Lenora felt her pulse match his, fast and rhythmic, every sense alive with anticipation. "They're not alone," Tokuda muttered. His voice was low, calm, but it carried a weight that made Lenora understand how grave the situation had become. "There are more of them than we can see. We must assume the worst." Fear twisted her stomach, but she pushed it down. "Then we fight," she said, voice small but unwavering. The words surprised even her. She had never spoken like this before, never felt so resolved. Dakota's eyes flicked to hers, and for a moment the tension softened just enough for her to feel a strange comfort in his presence. The wind shifted, carrying a faint sound from the distant hills. Tokuda crouched lower, hand brushing the grass, listening. "They are circling," he said, moving slowly, testing our defenses. "They will make their choice soon, stand or retreat. We must be ready to act." Lenora glanced around the homestead, taking in the fences, the barns, and the empty fields. This land had been quiet for years, protected only by her labor and persistence. Now, It was alive with threat, every shadow concealing potential danger. Her gaze returned to Tokuda, whose presence alone gave her courage. His movements were precise, practiced, every decision calculated to keep them safe. "They won't expect you to fight alongside me," he said quietly, reading her thoughts, "but you must. Not just for yourself, but for the land, for what it represents." Lenora swallowed hard, nodding. She had never held a weapon in her hands in anger, never faced an intruder with the intent to defend. Yet the night demanded courage beyond anything she had imagined, and she felt a strange resolve harden inside her. If she faltered now, everything she had worked for at the land, the legacy, the hope she clung to, would be lost. The first intruder stepped into the moonlight, a figure tall and wiry, his eyes glinting with calculation. He paused at the edge of the fence, measuring the distance, testing the resolve of the two who dared oppose him. Lenora's grip tightened on the iron rod she had found in the barn, her knuckles whitening. Dakota's stance was calm, yet she could sense the coiled strength beneath it, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Then the second figure appeared, the woman with cold, calculating eyes. She moved silently, her footsteps almost soundless on the dry grass. Lenora could feel the tension between them, the unspoken understanding that any misstep could lead to disaster. Dakota's voice broke the silence. "You underestimate us," he said, low and steady. "This land is defended. We'll not take it without consequence." The man shifted, hand brushing the hilt of a gun, but he did not fire. Instead, he exchanged a glance with his companion, hesitation flickering in his eyes. It was clear they had expected fear, expected hesitation, perhaps even surrender. But what they did not anticipate was Lenora standing firm. Her presence a quiet challenge that mirrored Tokuda's own resolve. Time seemed to stretch. Every second waited with anticipation. The wind carried the rustle of grass, the distant cry of a coyote, and the faint sound of movement in the hills. Every instinct screamed danger. Every shadow whispered threat, and yet neither Lenora nor Tokuda moved to strike. They waited, knowing that the first act could decide everything. Lenora felt a surge of courage. "You don't know what you're up against," she said, voice clear and steady. "This land has been protected by those who care for it. We will not yield." Her words rang through the night, firm and unwavering. The strangers paused, as if surprised by her defiance, and for a brief moment, the tension shifted. Dakota's eyes met hers, and she understood the unspoken message. "Trust in your courage. Stand with me." The land, the legacy, the promise of what could come all depended on the strength of their resolve. The wind shifted again, carrying a distant sound, a sharp whistle, signal perhaps that there were more eyes on them than they had realized. Tokuda's jaw tightened. "They are testing the perimeter," he muttered. "We may not be alone." Every shadow now could hold more than we see. Lenora felt the weight of his words. The night had become a living entity, full of threat and possibility. Every heartbeat reminded her that the moment for action was near, that the choices they made in the coming minutes would define the safety of the homestead, the future of her land, and the fragile hope she had placed in Tokuda. The strangers moved closer, their intentions clearer now. Tokuda shifted, ready to defend, and Lenora felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was the night where courage met necessity, where the fragile bonds of trust and desperation would be tested against those who sought to take what was not theirs. Suddenly, a loud snap of a branch echoed from the hills, closer this time, and the two intruders froze, glancing toward the sound. Tokuda's muscles coiled, ready to strike, and Lenora's grip on the iron rod tightened. The moment stretched taut, every second a heartbeat of danger. Lenora thought of the land, of her husband's legacy, and of the promise she had made to herself. She thought of Tokuda, the warrior who had arrived like a force of destiny, and she felt a deep, unspoken bond between them. Whatever came next, she knew that they would face it together, each relying on the other for strength, courage, and survival. The shadows seemed to shift again, moving with intent, and Lenora realized that the intruders were not acting alone. There were more of them, hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. Tokuda's eyes narrowed, calculating, his body coiled like a spring. "They will make their move soon," he said quietly. "We must be ready for everything." Lenora swallowed hard. Mind raced, weighing possibilities, imagining threats, calculating risks. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it down, focusing on what mattered: the land, the legacy, the fight for survival, and the hope that she and Takuda could endure the night together. The distant hills seemed alive, whispers of movement echoing through the darkness. Every sense was heightened, every instinct screaming that the climax of this confrontation was near. Lenora felt her pulse quicken, the tension coiling tighter with each passing moment. She could see Takuda's hand resting lightly on the knife, every muscle ready, every decision deliberate. Then, from the shadows, the first clear movement, the intruders stepping forward, intent and determined. The moment had come. The night held its breath, and the plains themselves seemed to lean closer, anticipating the unfolding struggle. Lenora stood beside Takuda, ready to face the storm, ready to defend the land she loved, ready to see the consequences of the choices she had made. And in that moment, as the first act of the confrontation began, she felt a strange exhilaration, the raw, unfiltered tension of a story that had reached the edge of possibility, the brink of change, and the precipice of destiny. The night was alive, the intruders closing in, and Lenora realized that everything, the land, the legacy, her future, and the fragile hope she had placed in Toka depended on what would happen next. Every heartbeat, every movement, every choice would matter. The climax was near, and the story of courage, trust, and survival was poised to explode into the night. The wind carried whispers, the shadows stretched longer, and the world seemed to pause, holding its breath. Lenora's hand brushed against Tokuda's arm, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared, the strength they would need, and the storm that was about to break. And then, in the stillness of the night, the tension reached its peak. Every sense screaming that the moment for action had arrived, yet the resolution remained just out of reach, suspended in the darkness. Waiting to be revealed, the tension in the night broke like lightning, sudden and violent. Shadows surged from the hills, the intruders finally committing to their advance, but Takuda was ready. He moved with a precision that belied the darkness, each step measured, each motion purposeful. Lenora felt her heart hammering as she mirrored his movements, keeping close, every sense alert, every instinct sharpened. The first intruder stepped onto the clearing near the fence, his gun drawn, but Takuda was faster. In a blur of motion, he intercepted the man, forcing him back with strength and skill born of years surviving the wild plains. Lenora's voice rang out, sharp and fearless. "Leave now, and no one gets hurt." The words carried more power than she had imagined. For the first time, she felt truly capable, not just a woman defending her home, but a partner standing beside a warrior in the fight for survival. The second intruder, the woman with calculating eyes, hesitated. She had counted on fear, on hesitation, but what she saw instead was courage mirrored in the eyes of both Lenora and Tokuda. A flicker of doubt passed across her face, a realization that the homestead and the people defending it would not be claimed easily. Takuda's knife flashed under the moonlight, a warning more than a strike. "We protect what is ours," he said, voice steady and commanding. "You can leave, or you will face the consequences." The words cut through the night like a blade. For a tense heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. The intruders exchanged a glance, weighing their options. And then slowly they began to retreat, the threat dissolving into the shadows from which it had come. Tokuda did not relax immediately, keeping his eyes sharp, ensuring they were truly gone. Lenora's breath came in shaky gasps, but a sense of relief began to bloom. "You," she began, her voice trembling. "You saved the land. You saved me." Tokuda turned to her, his expression softening for the first time that night. "We saved it together," he said simply. "Courage comes from more than strength. It comes from the willingness to stand for what you believe is worth protecting." The first hints of dawn painted the sky with soft oranges and pinks, the plains bathed in the gentle light of a new day. Lenora stepped outside, feeling the cool morning air against her skin, the threat of the night already shrinking behind her. She looked over the land she had fought to protect, and for the first time it felt more than just property, felt alive, resilient, and filled with promise. Takuda stood beside her, quiet but steady. He watched the sunrise, his dark eyes reflecting the first light. "The plains remember those who fight for them," he said, voice low. "And they reward those who endure." Lenora felt the weight of his words settle over her like a promise. Over the next days, life began to regain a rhythm. Lenora and Takoda worked together to repair the fences, tend the animals, and reinforce the homestead. The bond between them deepened, rooted not only in necessity and survival, but in trust and mutual respect. Lenora saw the quiet strength in Takoda, the way he approached every task with focus, the way he listened to the land and to her, and the way he carried both the wisdom and the history of his people. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lenora finally spoke the words she had kept close to her heart since their first meeting. "Takoda, about my offer." She hesitated, feeling the vulnerability of the moment. "I was desperate, yes. But I also knew that you were the one who could understand the weight of legacy, the importance of protecting what we love." Takoda regarded her calmly, his eyes steady. "I understand," he said. "And your courage, your honesty, it matters more than you realize. The future is built not just on survival, but on the choices we make, and the risks we are willing to take for those we trust." Lenora smiled, a mix of relief and hope washing over her. The danger of the night, the tension of the intruders, and the uncertainty of her own heart had brought them to this moment. And in that moment, the land she loved, the legacy she had fought to preserve, and the possibility of life and connection seemed to shine brighter than ever before. In the weeks that followed, Lenora began to see the transformation not just in the homestead, but within herself. The land that had once felt isolated and silent now thrummed with life. Takoda's presence was steady and grounding, a reminder that courage and resilience could manifest in both action and partnership. Together they planned for the future, tending to the fields, strengthening the fences, and ensuring that the homestead would endure. The seasons shifted as they always do, and with each passing day, Lenora felt the quiet promise of new life and new beginnings. The land had been tested, the threats had been faced, and the courage of a widow and a warrior had preserved what mattered most. Takoda remained by her side, not just as protector, but as companion, partner, and friend. Morning. As the first snow began to dust the plains, Lenora and Takoda stood at the edge of the fields, watching the wind ripple across the land. "Towers," Lenora said softly, voice filled with wonder. "We protected it, saved it." Takoda nodded, the weight of the past months reflected in his eyes, and now it is ready for the future. For growth, for life, for hope. He glanced at her. And in that glance was the unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had faced together, the danger, the fear, the courage, and the choices that had bound them to one another. As the sun rose higher, casting light across the plains, Lenora felt a sense of peace settle over her. The land was safe, her legacy intact, and the future, once uncertain and fraught with danger, now held the promise of life and continuity. She understood that courage, honesty, and trust had carried them through the darkest night, and that the choices she had made, bold and daring, had led to a new beginning. Takoda placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, steady and reassuring. "The land and the life it holds is resilient. And so are we." Lenora smiled, the warmth of the moment filling her heart. The plains stretched endlessly before them, full of possibility, full of history, and full of the quiet promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. The intruders were gone, the danger had passed, and the homestead stood strong. Lenora's heart, once weighed down by loneliness and uncertainty, now held hope, courage, and the knowledge that she was not alone. The land had survived, the legacy endured, and the bond between widow and warrior had created a foundation for life, trust, and connection. As the seasons continued, Lenora tended the fields, and Takoda watched over the land with the calm vigilance of one who understands the balance between danger and peace. They spoke of the future, of life, of growth, and of the promise of children and legacy. Every action they took, every seed planted, every fence repaired, became a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of human connection. The plains whispered around them, carrying stories of survival, of love, and of hope. And in that quiet, enduring rhythm, Lenora Blackwell and Takoda, the Apache warrior, found not just safety and protection, but a shared life built on trust, courage, and the unyielding desire to preserve what was most precious. The homestead, once isolated and fragile, now thrived under their care. The land, the legacy, and the lives of those who tended it had been preserved through courage, wisdom, and partnership. And though the plains would always hold shadows, and though danger could return, Lenora and Dakota knew that together they could meet whatever challenges came their way, carrying forward the promise of hope, life, and enduring love. The wind swept across the fields, rustling the tall grasses, carrying the scent of earth, sagebrush, and snow. Lenora closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the land beneath her feet, the history in her hands, and the future stretching wide and open before her, where she turned to Dakota. And in their shared gaze was the unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had endured and everything they had yet to face. The night had tested them. The plains had challenged them, but the dawn had arrived. And with it came the promise that courage, determination, trust could turn even the loneliest and most uncertain beginnings into a story of survival, legacy, and new life. Lenora and Dakota stood side by side, watching the sun climb higher, the world bathed in light. And in that light, the land, the legacy, and the promise of the future were theirs, secure and full of hope.